Dr. Vance?" The word came out of a man Nora hadn't seen in 5 years, half shouted over the dying thrum of a helicopter rotor spinning down outside. Her hands didn't stop moving over the girl in front of her, they never did. But around the bay, 4 heads came up at once. A residence, the charge nurses, Deb's. And last of all, Victor Hale's. Nobody at Ashgrove General had ever called her that. In the next 10 minutes, every one of them would understand why somebody finally had. Nora Vance had worked the Ashgrove General for 4 years. And in 4 years no one had asked her a question she couldn't answer in under 10 seconds, flat and useful. "Vance, you want to weigh in?" Dr. Victor Hale asked it the way he asked everything from a nurse. Half rhetorical, already moving on before she could actually weigh in. He was reviewing a chart at the board, a laceration repair gone sideways under a second-year resident's hands. Sutures pulled through. Again. Wider bites, less tension. Same as last time. Nora didn't look up from the tray she was restocking. Noted. Hale didn't write it down. He rarely did, when it came from her. Her hands, threading a new set of forceps into their slot, didn't flicker doing it. It was the first thing about her that had ever been remarkable. And the only thing left that still was. "You've got steadier hands than half my residents," said Deb Alvarez, the tech next to her. Comes from a life of very calm decision-making. Nora smiled the smile that ended most follow-up questions. Hale caught the tail end of it. "Some of us have actual medical decisions to make, Vance." He didn't finish the sentence. The hierarchy usually finished it for him. A radio behind the desk crackled with routine traffic. A fender bender 2 exits north. And Nora's eyes flicked toward it before she caught herself and went back to the tray. A boy came through with a fishhook buried in his palm, more embarrassed than hurt, insisting his older brother had dared him. "Deep breath," Nora said, thread already looped around the barb. "Look at me, not the hand. Tell me something you're good at." He said video games. Her hands had the hook free and the dressing half taped before he'd finished explaining the difference between 2 controllers she'd never heard of. Faster than the moment needed. Faster than she meant to let it show. She slowed down, deliberately, taping the last strip down at half speed. The way she used to have to remind herself to in a different building, a long time ago. "You didn't even use the numbing gel," he said, betrayed. "You didn't need it. You needed a controller lecture." He laughed, and his mother, waiting by the curtain, mouthed a thank you. "You're doing the thing again," said Hale, catching her at the supply cart. "Where you fix things that aren't on the chart. Occupational hazard." She kept her voice light. "One of these days that's going to bite you." He said it almost like a warning. And almost like he meant something more specific by it, though neither of them said what. A man in his 40s came in with chest pain he'd been ignoring for 2 days, insisting it was probably just a pulled muscle from moving furniture. Nora ran the EKG anyway, over his mild protest. And caught a subtle elevation the resident on duty nearly waved off as artifact. "Run it again," she said, quiet enough not to undercut him in front of the patient. "And this time don't stand near the machine." The second strip confirmed it. Cardiology took him up within the hour, and the resident thanked her twice before the end of the shift. The second time slower, more deliberate, the kind of thank you meant to stick. Grace Liu, the administrator running the search for the next chief of emergency medicine, walked the floor with Hale for 20 minutes that afternoon, clipboard in hand. And he made a point of correcting a nurse loudly enough for her to notice. The second time, it was Nora. "Ma'am, I appreciate the initiative, but we follow protocol here." He said it like a lesson, for an audience of 1. "Understood, Dr. Hale." She signed off without arguing. Arguing with Victor Hale about protocol in front of Grace Liu was a fight built to be lost on purpose, and she wasn't in the mood to lose one on the record. "He does that more when there's a clipboard around," Deb murmured once Grace had moved on. "I've noticed." Nora went back to restocking. There wasn't much else to say that would change anything, so she didn't say it. Grace herself paused at the desk before she left the floor. "You've got sharper instincts than most nurses twice your tenure here." Any interest in charge nurse, or the admin track? I like this one fine. Nora smiled, and meant it more than the smile let on. There was a particular safety in being the one no one looked at twice, and she'd built 4 careful years on top of it. Grace nodded once, filing the answer away for later, and moved on down the hall. At the end of her shift, Nora sat in her car in the Ash Grove parking structure for 4 minutes before starting the engine. Palms flat against the wheel, watching them not shake in the dashboard light. Her phone buzzed once, a reminder she'd set herself years back and always dismissed without reading past the first word. Whitfield, it said, and nothing else. Because she'd never let herself write the rest of the sentence. Her thumb found the delete button and stayed there a second longer than usual. Then she closed the screen instead, put the phone face down on the passenger seat, and drove home. The chief of emergency medicine seat had been open since March. And Hale wanted it with the specific hunger of someone who'd already started rehearsing his acceptance speech. He'd started showing up earlier, staying later, correcting nurses within earshot of anyone who might report back. 6 more weeks of him auditioning for a promotion, Deb said, low, restocking gauze. Lucky us. I've survived worse audiences. Nora kept her hands moving, folding drapes with a precision that made the folding look like it mattered more than it did. A drill alarm went off at 2, a scheduled disaster preparedness test. Mock triage tags laid out in the ambulance bay. Staff filed out at half speed, unbothered, everyone having done this drill a dozen times before. Hale, walking a mock triage line for Grace Lou's benefit, dropped a laminated tag. And his hand, reaching to pick it back up, wasn't quite steady doing it. Small, gone in a second, and Nora was the only one on the floor who caught it. She walked the tags with the rest of them, tagging a mannequin red without needing to check the card twice. And for as long as the drill lasted, something in her chest sat very still and very awake, a feeling she hadn't let herself have in years. You're fast at this, a resident said. Muscle memory. It came out flatter than she meant it to. And she covered the rest with a joke about the mannequin's bedside manner before anyone could ask what the muscle remembered from. Where do you learn disaster triage like that, anyway? A different resident asked, still logging his tags. Different hospital. Nora was already moving toward the next mannequin. And the answer left no room behind it for a follow-up question. Hale used the drill debrief to remind the room, twice, that decisive leadership under pressure was precisely what the board would be evaluating. And that he intended to demonstrate it personally, whenever the real thing came. He wasn't always this insufferable about it, an older resident murmured to another, just loud enough for Nora to catch on her way past. March, maybe. Before the transfusion thing. What transfusion thing? He called a massive transfusion on a GI bleed that turned out to be a bad ulcer. Committee spent 3 months on it. Cost him the last opening on this same committee. The resident dropped his voice further. He's not wrong that it's his turn again. He's just terrified he'll flinch the same way twice. Nora filed it away without meaning to. Not her business, but it would matter later. Hale found her again within the hour. Correcting a nurse's dosing change in front of a resident, then Nora herself, at volume, over an IV site the chart plainly showed had failed on the prior shift. She didn't correct him. She changed the site and let the record speak later, to no one in particular. He's really building his case this week, Deb muttered afterward. He's building something. I'm not sure it's a case. Nora kept her voice light, and went back to her rounds before Deb could turn it into a longer conversation. The resident who'd watched Hale do it caught up with Nora at the med cart afterward, cheeks still red on her behalf. For what it's worth, the site was fine yesterday. He just wanted an audience for finding a problem today. I know. Nora handed her a fresh set of gloves. Document the timestamp anyway. It protects you either way. Does it ever bother you? Him talking to you like that? Every day. Nora said it lightly enough that the resident laughed, unsure if it was a joke. And Nora let her keep thinking it was. You ever going to push back on him? Deb asked, quieter, in the supply room. Pushing back costs more than it buys, in my experience. She didn't explain which experience she meant. That a specific experience, or a general one? Both, probably. Nora let the joke sit there without finishing it. For 1 second the real answer was right at the back of her teeth. A hospital name, a board hearing, a version of herself Deb had never met. And then she swallowed it back down where it had lived for 4 years, and Deb, wisely, didn't press. Deb studied her a second longer than the joke needed. You know, for someone who claims a boring life, you've got a lot of very specific opinions about hospital committees. Everyone's got opinions about hospital committees. Mine just happened to be correct. That's the most confident thing you've said all shift. Deb laughed, and let it go, and Nora let herself breathe again. For the record, Deb said at the lockers later, I think you'd run this floor better than he does. Noted, and never repeated. Nora kept folding her jacket, and didn't examine too closely why some part of her wanted it to be true. She drove home, ate dinner standing at the counter, and slept the flat, dreamless sleep of someone who'd gotten very good at not leaving room for anything else. 4 minutes into the next night's shift. Dispatch changed all of that. The call came in 4 minutes into Nora's shift. Multi-vehicle collision on the interstate. A jackknifed semi and at least 4 passenger cars. Injuries ranging from minor to critical. 4 ambulances inbound and a state medevac helicopter already airborne with the worst of it. All hands, the charge nurse called. And the floor moved fast, without discussion. There wasn't an alternative. Deb was already at Nora's elbow. Copy that, she said, and shot Nora a look on her way past that carried more than either of them had time to unpack. Nora felt it arrive, the way it used to arrive a long time ago in a different building. A kind of quiet dropping into place behind her ribs. The noise of the room going distant and clean. She didn't examine the feeling. Examining it cost time she wasn't going to get back tonight. Hale took the desk like a man stepping into the role he'd been rehearsing for weeks. Bay 1, 2, 3, clear them out. 90 seconds to triage, everyone. The charge nurse was already on the phone with the lab, ordering a standing type and cross on anything that came through the doors unconscious. A second-year resident jogged past with an armful of warmed fluids. And a tech wheeled the crash cart into position without being told to. The whole floor moving in the particular choreography of people who drilled this exact scenario the previous shift and never expected to need it for real this soon. 4 cars and a semi, the charge nurse relayed, phone still at her ear. State troopers are calling it a mess. Semi-driver's trapped, second crew's cutting him out now. The radio crackled again before the first ambulance reached the bay doors. Inbound Unit 4, 16-year-old female, restrained backseat passenger, prolonged extrication, pressure dropping en route. Possible pelvic involvement on exam. Nora was already reaching for a binder and the phone. Get me trauma surgery on standby, and tell them it's a pelvis, she said to the charge nurse. Find out if that helicopter can carry a second team. That's not confirmed yet, Hale said, behind her. It will be in 4 minutes. I'd rather be early. The first ambulance brought a woman with a broken wrist, cradling it against her chest. Apologizing to everyone in sight for the trouble, as though the semi that hit her car had been a scheduling inconvenience she was personally responsible for. Nora splinted it in under 2 minutes and moved on before the third apology finished. The second brought a teenage boy with a mild concussion and a father narrating every second of the crash in a voice climbing steadily toward panic. He's fine, Nora told him, flat and direct. Watch him talk to me for 30 seconds. That's a brain that's working. The father exhaled like he'd been holding it since the highway. The third ambulance brought a driver with a collapsing lung, gray around the lips, gasping in short useless pulls. Hale got the tube in himself, fast and clean, and for one genuine moment looked like the Dr. Grace Liu had been shown all month. Nora clocked it and said nothing, because it was true, and true didn't cancel out the rest of what he was. The fourth ambulance brought Maya Ferris, 16, unresponsive to voice, blood pressure sliding. Her pelvis unstable under the log roll, a soft, wrong give where there should have been none, right where the radio report had warned it might be. 16. Restrained, car versus semi, prolonged extrication, the paramedic called out, handing off report at a jog. Pressure's been dropping the whole ride in. Nora had her hands on the girl before the gurney fully stopped moving. Log rolling her with the tech's help in one motion that didn't waste a second on anything but the information it needed. Maya's mother arrived at the ambulance bay doors 2 minutes later, having been called from the scene by a state trooper, and had to be walked back into the family room by a chaplain before she saw anything that would stay with her longer than the facts already would. GCS is 7 and falling, the resident called. Get her intubated, Nora said, already positioning the girl's legs. Victor, that's you. I've got the bleed. Hale didn't argue. He moved to the head of the bed, and for a few seconds the two of them worked in a silence that almost looked like partnership. Binder's going on. I need her legs rotated in and held until it's tensioned, Nora said, taking the weight of it herself before anyone else could reach it. This is a non-compressible pelvic bleed. She needs blood, not more saline. I want a normal pressure before I commit to a transfusion protocol, Hale said, tube secured, turning back to the monitor. Bring her up first. If you bring her pressure all the way up, you blow this wider before anyone can close it. Permissive hypotension. High enough to perfuse, not high enough to blow the clot she's barely holding onto. Raise it now, and she bleeds out faster. That's the whole argument. That's an old argument, Vance. Fluid resuscitation to a normal pressure is standard of care. It was, years ago. It isn't anymore. And some part of you already knows that, or you wouldn't still be flinching from that transfusion call in March. She said it fast, not unkindly, and regretted the timing of it even as she said it. Hale's jaw tightened. For a second he looked like a man doing math he didn't want to do out loud. The last time he'd trusted his gut on a bleed, a committee had spent 3 months taking his judgment apart in a conference room. And he'd never quite gotten his footing back after. Fine, he said finally. But I want eyes on her the second that pressure moves. You'll have them. Nora didn't look up from the binder strap. Start the protocol, he said, to the room, not to her, and it cost him something to say it that way. She meets criteria on 3 of 4, Nora said, already documenting it as she spoke. That's a protocol activation, not an order overriding yours. I'm writing it that way. Tex is already running, Deb said, before anyone had to ask. 2 grams, like you'd want. 1 drug, 1 job. Help the blood she had left actually clot instead of just leaking out. Blood banks sending the first units up now, the charge nurse called, phone still pinned between shoulder and ear. Second rounds cross-matched and waiting if you need it. We'll need it, Nora said, not looking up. 6 minutes to that helicopter, the charge nurse called from the doorway. 90/55, Deb reported. Holding. Keep it there. Not higher. Nora's hands didn't move off the strap. Higher costs her more than lower does tonight. 2 minutes to that helicopter. Maya's pressure climbed a little on its own, 100/60, and Nora's jaw tightened instead of easing. That's climbing too fast. Slow the blood back half a rate. The helicopter landed 90 seconds later. Rotor wash rattling the bay doors hard enough to send a stack of paper cups skittering off the counter. The flight team came through with a second patient, the semi-driver, burned along one arm, loud with pain but stable. And the room absorbed him without breaking stride, a tech peeling off to take the handoff while everyone else stayed on Maya. 1 step behind the stretcher, a tall, tired man in a flight suit stopped dead in the doorway. Staring at the hands holding Maya's legs still like he recognized them before he recognized the face above them. Dr. Vance? Aaron Kessler said it like a question his whole body had already answered. No one moved. Around the bay, Hale's eyes went from Kessler to Nora and back, uncomprehending. Waiting for someone to explain a joke he wasn't in on. Small world, Aaron. She didn't look up. Her hands didn't move. You called this in as a pelvis before your own ambulance hit the bay. That's not something they teach. He was already scrubbing in beside her. Nobody had to teach me twice. 5 years, and you never once called me back. It wasn't quite an accusation. It came out more like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying for longer than he wanted to admit. I know. She kept her eyes on the strap. Not tonight, Aaron. Not tonight, he agreed, and let it go. The thing that actually mattered was still breathing on the table between them, and neither of them had time tonight for anything else. You really never told them? Kessler asked, quieter now, like he already half knew the answer. Never came up. Nora didn't look up from the strap. He let that sit a second, and didn't ask again. How long since intubation? Kessler asked, all business now, eyes on the monitor. 6 minutes. Pressure's been holding since the binder went on. Nora didn't look up either. Riboa team should already be moving. A balloon on a catheter, up through the groin, to pinch that vessel shut from the inside until someone can get in there properly. She won't tolerate much more time on the table before it finishes what it started. Copy. Let's move. Kessler's hands joined hers for a moment on the gurney rail, an old rhythm neither of them had to relearn. Trauma surgeon, Kessler said, to the room now, not just to her. 6 years at Whitfield, before. He stopped himself, reading something in her face, and didn't finish it. Vance was a surgeon? The words came out slow, from Hale, like he was testing each one before he let it go. Dr. Vance, Kessler said, correcting him without raising his voice, which somehow landed harder than shouting would have. Hale's head came up slowly. He didn't say anything else at all. No one asked him to explain further. Hale's hands, still faintly unsteady since the intubation, said everything the room needed to understand about which one of them had actually known what to do tonight. Kessler took the surgical call within the minute, and Nora said the rest of it plainly. It only needed saying once. For what it's worth, I don't have the authority to call a surgical consult or order Riboa readiness. I did it anyway. I'll put my name on that in writing tonight, and whatever it costs, it costs. Noted, Kessler said, and it wasn't a threat, just an acknowledgement. You want me scrubbing in too? Nora asked, and for a second the old rhythm nearly answered before she caught it. I'm not licensed for that part anymore. I know. Just tell me what you're seeing. Kessler didn't slow down moving the gurney, and something in the ease of the question told her he'd already decided the answer didn't need to be complicated. Internal iliac, most likely. Distal to the aortic bifurcation, based on where the binder's holding it. That matches what I'd guess blind. Good enough for me. He nodded once at the tech beside him. And the gurney started moving toward the angio suite with the fast, unhurried competence of two people who'd once worked this kind of night together, many times, somewhere else. Hale trailed a step behind them, silent, watching the gurney clear the doors. He opened his mouth once, twice, and both times closed it again without a word. The first time in 4 years Nora had seen him with nothing rehearsed to say. Nora walked beside the gurney as far as the doors, hands finally empty. And let herself feel, for the length of one breath, 5 years of a name no one here had said out loud until tonight. Grace Liu was standing just inside the doorway, clipboard down at her side for once. She didn't say anything either. She didn't have to. Whatever she'd come to observe about leadership under pressure tonight, she'd gotten a very different answer than the one she'd been shown all month. Ms. Vance, Grace said finally, testing the name like a step on ice she wasn't sure would hold her weight. Is there a version of that name I should be writing down for the record? Not tonight. Nora's voice was even, but not unkind. Ask me again in a week. I will. Grace didn't smile, exactly, but something in her face settled. Like an answer she'd already half expected had just been confirmed. She moved off down the corridor without another word, clipboard still hanging at her side. Deb found Nora a minute later. You want to tell me what that was? Not yet. Nora looked down at her own hands, steady as they'd ever been, and for once didn't have a joke ready to cover the silence. Okay. Deb didn't push, which was, from Deb, its own kind of gift. She lingered anyway, restocking a tray that didn't need restocking, clearly not ready to walk away yet. For what it's worth, whatever you used to be, you're a hell of a nurse now too. I just wanted that said once, out loud. Nora didn't answer right away. Thank you, she said finally, and meant it more plainly than she'd meant most things in 4 years. You gonna sleep tonight? Probably not. Nora almost smiled. Ask me again in a week. Apparently that's the going answer tonight. Maya came out of the angio suite 40 minutes later, stable, still sedated, on her way to the ICU to ride out the tube overnight. Kessler said afterward it wouldn't have gone that way if the pelvis had been called in the first 20 minutes instead of the first 4. Maya's mother found Nora in the hallway before dawn, still in scrubs, and didn't say anything at all. Just took her hand, held it a long moment, and let go. Nora didn't tell her who she used to be. It wasn't the moment for it, and some truths were more useful kept small. Hale found Nora at the supply cart afterward, his voice smaller than she'd heard it in 4 years. You could have told me. Told you what? That I used to be somebody, so you'd treat me like one? Nora kept restocking gauze without looking up. You didn't listen to me because of a name, Victor. You didn't listen to me because I was a nurse. The name just made it inconvenient to keep doing that in front of witnesses. I could still report all of it. The consult, the Riboa call. None of it was yours to order. You could. She met his eyes for the first time in the conversation. Are you going to? He didn't answer right away, and then he didn't answer at all, which was, in its own way, an answer. He left the cart without finishing whatever else he'd come to say, and Nora let him go. Grace Lou stopped by an hour later, all business again, clipboard back in hand. The committee's going to want a statement from you about tonight. Standard procedure, given the mass casualty designation. I'll write one. There's also this. Grace's voice didn't soften for it. A scope of practice flag goes into your file. The consult call, the Riboa order. It's procedural, not punitive, but it's permanent, and it's real. If you ever go back in front of a licensing board for anything, that flag goes with you. I know. Nora had already done the math on that one, standing at the binder strap. Write an honest statement anyway. Grace held her gaze a beat longer than the sentence needed. I already saw what I saw. The board announced its decision 2 days later. No one told Hale why he didn't get the seat. He kept his job. He kept coming in early and staying late. He stopped correcting nurses within earshot of clipboards. Which was either humility or math, and Nora didn't much care which. So? Deb asked, the day the decision came down. You ever going to tell me what that night actually was? Trauma surgeon. 6 years at Whitfield. Long story, most of it not good. Nora finally said the rest of what Deb had only half heard the night of the crash. I'd kept my RN license current since before medical school, back when nursing paid my way through it. It's the one piece of paper the board's revocation never touched. When the rest of it fell apart, that's the door that was still unlocked. That explain the hands? That explains the hands. Kessler found her before he flew back out. I called. Twice, the first year. You never called back. I know. She'd known it for 5 years. A fact that had stopped doing anything useful for her a long time ago. I still have the original transfusion log. The one that shows the blood bank mislabeled that unit, not you. If you ever wanted to try the board again. She didn't answer him that night. She drove home, and her phone buzzed once on the passenger seat. Whitfield, it said, the same reminder she'd set and never finished reading years back. This time she opened it. There was nothing else in it. She'd never let herself write past the first word. She read the blank space where the rest of the sentence should have been, and, for the first time, deleted it. The next morning, before her shift, Nora called a lawyer whose name she'd looked up and never dialed. Every few months, for 4 years running. State Medical Board Appeals, the voice on the other end said, brisk and unsurprised. You said you have a witness and a document? A trauma surgeon and a transfusion log the original hearing never saw. That's more than most people bring me. It's not a guarantee. Boards don't love reopening their own mistakes. A pause. One more thing. If we reopen this, Everything you've done since goes into the record too. Anything in the last few years you'd rather not have looked at closely? Nora thought about a pelvic binder, a surgical consult she'd had no authority to call, and a name she'd finally said out loud. Probably, she said. Thursday still works. Thursday works. She hung up, sat a moment in the parked car, and looked at her hands in the morning light. They weren't shaking. For the first time in 5 years, some small, stubborn part of her wished, just once, that they would. We tend to assume that people who stay calm under pressure have made peace with whatever happened to them. Sometimes calm isn't peace. Sometimes it's just what's left after you've decided fighting costs more than it buys, until, one night, it doesn't. Nora didn't get her name back because someone finally recognized her talent. She got it back because a crisis stripped away everyone's ability to pretend the hierarchy was the same thing as competence. That's a harder story to tell than a simple comeback, and a truer one. Most people who've been quietly demoted by life aren't waiting for a dramatic reversal. They're just waiting for one moment where the truth is more useful to everyone in the room than the story they've all agreed to believe instead. If this one got to you, that's Hidden Stretch. Hit like, subscribe if you're new here, and tell us in the comments, what's something you stopped fighting for, that maybe you shouldn't have?